It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. This show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. Go to emailrevealer.com, get a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator. Also, any kind of PI services you might need, asset searches, locates, background checks, all that kind of stuff. First time you listen to the show, check out OppermanReport.com. We have a special members section. You can go to the members section. We have all kinds of exclusive content that you won't hear live on Friday nights or Saturday nights. It's only exclusive to members. The only way to hear it is if you're a member. You got to become a member. All the cool kids are members at the Opperman Report. Okay, big show today. We have the great Michael Rivero, who has probably the best domain name in the history of internet domain names, whatreallyhappened.com. How do you get better than that? He also has the What Really Happened radio show, and he's going back to a public broadcasting radio network shortly. Hey, Michael, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you for having me on your program, and I apologize for missing the other day. I'm just way overscheduled, and there was a goof on my part.
Yeah, don't worry about that at all. Obviously, it's happened to me too. I've double booked. I've, and what are you going to do, man? Life has gotten so crazy lately. It's so fast paced. You just can't keep things straight. So, Michael, why don't you tell the audience about yourself? Who is Michael Rivero?
Well, I'm just an ordinary person. I've had a colorful life here, not always of my own intention and design. I literally started out as a farm kid in New Hampshire, and then my family moved to California, and I had a brief career as a child actor, but my first love was astronomy, so that's what I studied, and I won a small science fair in high school, which brought me to the attention of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I went to work for them right out of high school while going to college part-time, and I stayed with NASA through basically the end of the Apollo program, at which point NASA started cutting staff left and right, and I got caught in those layoffs. And so a friend of my girlfriend's hairdressers, lawyers, chiropodists, who knew about my strange dual background of having been in show business and knowing all about this newfangled thing called microcomputers, sent me over to this little cinder block hole-in-the-wall in Van Nuys called Industrial Light and Magic, and it was a classic case of being in the right place at the right time. They were just in the process of splitting, and what is ILM now moved to Northern California. What stayed behind became Apogee, and I was working on Star Trek, and that was the beginning of my film and television career, which ran up until 1994, where I found myself blacklisted in connection with information I discovered regarding the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster during the Clinton administration. And it wasn't like I set out to say, I'm going to destroy my career and, get on out there. All I did was just say, hey, there's something weird about what's going on. And all of a sudden I couldn't get work, and I wound up eventually leaving Southern California, and I got a chance to come to Hawaii to work on a movie for a Japanese company that didn't care that the White House didn't like me, and we just stayed. And I wound up getting my career back partly. I was a visual effects producer / supervisor on Lost, Off the Map, the pilot for Hawaii Five-0. But after a while, the workload got to be too much, and I had to make a choice, and I decided that the truth activism and the radio and trying to stop a nuclear war was much more important than just, continuing to hang out on movie sets and ogle the female actresses and everything.
Yeah, but that's the fun part too. Okay, but I'm a little unclear now. And you're saying you were working in the film industry, and you became aware of the Vince Foster case. But then
how that came about is I had a small animation shop in my home. I was also working for a company that was in Hollywood that shared the same building as CNN. And I'm working at home, and all of a sudden they put up that photo that the White House leaked to Reuters, showing the hand of Vince Foster and the gun he supposedly shot himself with. Now, you need to understand, it was my business at that point to know what makes something look real or not. And the instant I looked at this picture, I said, this is fake. This is staged. There's so many things wrong with it. There was no visible blood anywhere on the white sleeve or hand or gun. And so I printed out a hard copy of that. And the next day, while I was at the company that shared the building with CNN, we're outside at this little lunch cafe, and I remember some people from CNN listening very closely to me as I'm pointing out, this is completely messed up. This is a staged shot. It's a fake. And that night, we started getting threatening phone calls, and I got let go from that company, and I couldn't, my career had evaporated. And anybody who has studied the history of COINTELPRO, in particular the blacklisting of actress Jean Seberg in the 1960s, this is how the government treats anybody who is all of a sudden looking at the world through open eyes. And I couldn't get any work at all. So for a short time, my wife and I actually moved up to Washington State because we were concerned about all the threats we were getting. But I was able to find work in other countries. And like I said, eventually we came here to Hawaii.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, now that makes sense. Okay, I'm familiar with the photo you're talking about.
Yes.
And, now you've before we get to that, a lot of people listen to the show are like mainstream kind of folks, and because we lure them in through doing fun shows, and we lure them in with the true crime shows and stuff like that. But we have a lot of people that are tuned into what's going on too. But for those mainstream folks, how about these folks who are considering in the New York primary tomorrow to vote for Hillary Clinton? Why don't you give us a back? What is the official story about Vince Foster? What is that story?
Well, the official story is that he was very depressed, he was overworked, and he just went off to this little Fort Marcy Park and shot himself in the mouth, and that was the official story. But there's all kinds of problems with it, and a lot of it has tie-ins with the Presidential Blind Trust. And basically, following my blacklisting from Hollywood, since all of a sudden I had a lot of free time on my hands, I started digging into the case, and I found in the official FBI records proof that they had been fraudulently manufacturing the testimony of Foster's wife, Lisa Foster. And they had interviewed her and showed her a silver-colored gun. And that's the way the FBI described it. And importantly, they didn't note the gun's serial number, which would be a normal procedure to verify that they're talking about the same weapon. And the original FD 302 form of the interview of Lisa Foster said that Lisa Foster recognized the silver-colored gun that had been found with her husband's body. But if you remember the photo, the gun seen with the body is dark blued steel, almost black. And there are other supporting records that confirm the official gun found with the body was dark blued steel. Now, Vince Foster owned a nickel-plated gun he had inherited from his father, but it's obvious they're not the same weapons. And when Robert Fisk paraphrased the FBI interview in his report claiming that Foster committed suicide, he omitted the description of the gun color. And again, nobody had recorded serial numbers of any of these weapons. And the more you look, the more you begin to realize that there are serious problems with this suicide. First of all, normal procedure when you find a body is you presume it's a murder. Suicide has to be proven because there is a long, long history of murders that are covered up by trying to make them look like suicides, whether it's Vincent Foster or Deborah Jean Palfrey or any of those people. And there were reports about a second bullet wound to the neck. There was the absence of blood, which indicated Foster was already dead when the gun was fired into his mouth. And it just continued to pile on up. Now, the motive for this, I think, has to do with the Presidential Blind Trust. It is a requirement that if you are elected president, all of your wealth has to be turned over to a trustee who will invest all of your wealth in places that you don't know about. So in theory, as president, your decisions will not be influenced by your own personal fortune. It's a very good idea. I think it should also be applied to members of Congress, but that's a topic for another show. And at the time Foster was murdered, it was already 6 months into the Clinton administration, and the trustee's office was making noise about where are the trust declarations. And Vincent Foster had been assigned to prepare the blind trust declarations for the Clintons. Now, the problem is we know now the Clinton blind trust was incomplete. They kept out some of their wealth in order to take advantage of the inside information they had in the government. And we know this because during the Whitewater hearings, one of the White House staff in the residence confirmed there was a filing cabinet full of financial papers in the private residence of the White House, and that's a violation of the blind trust. So getting on back to Vince Foster, Foster was probably dragging his heels on the declaration because he understood if he filed a fraudulent trust declaration and the fraud were ever revealed, he would be the person who would go to jail because he'd signed the documents. And the indications are he preferred to resign, and he did, in fact, have a meeting scheduled with Bill Clinton for the day after his body was found in Fort Marcy Park. Now, a lot of attention's been focused on this supposed suicide note. And after it was finally made public over White House objections, it was determined by handwriting experts that the portion in the middle is Vince Foster's handwriting, but it reads like it's an outline for a letter of resignation. The portions above and below are in somebody else's hand. That's another indicator that fraud was going on as well. I mean, there's a huge amount of evidence, and I have a dedicated page on this whole story. That was literally the story that launched whatreallyhappened.com.
Yeah, and that page is excellent. I advise everybody to go there to whatreallyhappened.com, and it's called The Death of Vince Foster. You can just find it that way. Now, what was Vince Foster's role at the White House?
Well, he was the deputy counsel. The second highest lawyer serving as legal counsel to the president. He'd been brought up with the Clintons from Little Rock. He was a longtime friend and his business associate. He worked with Hillary Clinton in the Rose Law Firm, and he was also one of Clinton's top fundraisers during his run for the White House. And it's rather interesting that Bill Clinton's 4 top fundraisers all died under questionable circumstances the first 6 months that Bill Clinton was in office.
Get the hell out of here. I never heard that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
All 4 of them.
Oh, and how did the other ones die?
One was a suicide, supposedly with a shotgun. That was Ed Willie. And the sick part of that is that the same day Ed Willie was being arcanicided was the same day that Bill Clinton was groping Kathleen Willie in the Oval Office.
How did the other 2 die?
Small plane crashes, and one was a small plane crash, and the other one was another questionable suicide. We have an article we wrote, the Clinton Dead Bodies List, and you can Google search that, and it's all these people who had the dirt on the Clintons who all met strange ends.
Okay, now, was it unusual for the second highest attorney in the White House to be also running the blind trust? Is it normal for the blind trust to be run out of the White House?
Well, basically, the counsel's office in the White House is there to serve the president, and as the blind trust is a requirement of the office, it was legitimate to have Vince Foster work on it. It wasn't mandatory. Clinton could have gone to an outside attorney, but remember, Vince Foster was a close friend and associate from years on end, and so if there was some kind of deception or fraud involved in that blind trust, Bill Clinton probably presumed Vince Foster was the safest person to carry it out. But Foster appeared to be going through a bit of an epiphany, because only a few weeks before he'd given a speech to some students where he talked about your personal integrity being the most important thing that you had. And I guess when you're down in Little Rock, crime and corruption and involvement with Iran-Contra is just part of the party. But actually, I think being in the White House had a profound impact on Vince Foster, and he wouldn't be the only one. We saw the same thing with President John F. Kennedy, where he was just a party boy and he was just having a good time, and then all of a sudden he wakes up one day and he's the President of the United States, and all of a sudden he decides, I think I'm going to try and do this job the way I think it should be done, which of course made huge numbers of enemies all around him.
Yeah, you're walking by, the bedroom that Lincoln slept in, it's going to change your perspective. Now, take us back to the day. Now, the official story is, he was depressed. They even said he was anorexic at one point. But he showed up for work. And who was the last person to see him alive?
The last person to see him alive was the office staff. He'd had lunch, and he gave one of the assistants the last of the M&Ms on his tray, and he walked on out. He just said, I'll be back in a while. And people assumed that either he was heading off for some kind of a tryst somewhere on the grounds, or he was going to go over and watch where Louis Freeh was being sworn in as the new head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But there is no record of Foster leaving the White House. That's another very questionable circumstance. The White House is the most guarded, secured, and surveilled building on the planet, and yet nobody can actually document Vince Foster leaving. He's not recorded in any of the Secret Service logbooks. None of the cameras see him. He just simply disappears from the middle of the White House and shows up dead in Fort Marcy Park.
Okay. Yeah, I know for a fact that those Secret Service logs are very, very accurate and they're very thorough. Who's the first one to find the body?
There was a gentleman, and first name is Patrick Knowlton, was just hiking through the park, and he'd been alerted because when he parked his car, he saw another car there, not Vince Foster's car, and there was somebody there that was just glaring at him, like just willing to go away. And so Knowlton walked on in, and he found the body, and he called the police, and that basically started the investigation. Knowlton himself was subject to a lot of harassment in an effort to get him to change his story about what he'd seen. But he has stuck with it all these years.
Now, were there any witnesses in the park who heard a gunshot?
No. There were no witnesses to the actual gunshot. It's entirely possible that the gun found with the body hadn't even been fired, and a gun with a silencer was used to inflict what would be claimed as the suicide wound. But again, there were witnesses at the park who saw a second bullet wound on the neck. And obviously, if you have a second wound, that sort of also rules against the idea of a suicide.
Yeah, it's very difficult to shoot yourself twice in the head. Now, it would seem to me right off the bat that this could not have been a premeditated murder. Because, like you said, you have a lot of Columbo type, clues
well, I'm
here.
going to disagree.
Yeah, okay.
I think it was planned a few days ahead. They planned to lure Foster to someplace private where they could actually kill him. I think he died of a broken neck, and I think the reason for the second bullet wound was if they were using a silenced gun. In order for a silencer to work, the bullet has to be traveling at below the speed of sound. It has to be a very light load, and it's entirely possible the bullet actually just caromed off the skull and came out the neck. And there was all kinds of questionable issues about the autopsy. No witnesses, records were vanishing, and it got very ridiculous because all of the photos of Foster taken at Fort Marcy Park, half of them were claimed to have been accidentally destroyed, and the other half are under government seal. And there was actually a case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Alan Favish, who was at the time with Judicial Watch, took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, saying that there was a public interest in knowing whether Foster really did commit suicide or not. And the Supreme Court basically came down and said, well, there's an exception for the Freedom of Information Act for privacy rights. And apparently, in the eyes of that Supreme Court, dead people still have a right to privacy, and they kept the pictures sealed. But according to Michael Rodriguez, who was working within the investigation and saw the photos that were claimed to have been destroyed, he said they did show a second bullet hole. And there's even a medical record where there is a description of the wound track as mouth to neck, and that's been whited out, but you can still read it. Now, with medical records, you never white anything out. You do a strike through an initial to indicate that there's been a change. But somebody tried to white out the reference to the neck wound.
Now, you mentioned Miguel Rodriguez. Now, he actually quit the investigation, right?
Yes. He felt that there was something going on that he did not want to be a part of.
And he actually worked for Ken Starr.
Yes, he worked for Ken Starr's office. Ken Starr took over from Robert Fisk. And there's a very interesting little story about Ken Starr you need to pay attention to.
Okay.
And it goes all the way back to the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And Reagan's Attorney General, William French Smith, was the Attorney General who changed the rules so that the CIA did not have to report any drug dealing activity they witnessed in their intelligence operations to the DEA. Critics called it the license to smuggle. And it basically gave the CIA a protected corridor that they could use for not only drug smuggling but arms smuggling, and that opened the door to the Iran-Contra scandal, where guns that were being manufactured without serial numbers in Arkansas were flown down to the Contras, and cocaine was brought back to pay for it all, and everybody was just making huge amounts of money on the side. And William French Smith's assistant in the Reagan Department of Justice was Ken Starr. So Ken Starr knows what's been going on behind the scenes. And so when all of this Whitewater investigation began to get really close to the smuggling operation at Mina, he distracted everybody with Monica Lewinsky and the stained blue dress, and he used this tawdry sex scandal to keep us from looking at the really important questions of government-sanctioned CIA drug smuggling.
And, of course, all that Mina, Arkansas drug smuggling and gun running went on right under whose nose?
Governor Bill Clinton.
Well, gee, that's a coincidence.
Yeah, it's an amazing coincidence.
It's amazing.
Only a conspiracy nut would believe there was something there.
Oh, come on. Don't be silly. Now, let me ask you a question, Michael. Back to the photograph of the gun. Now, because if you look at that, it looks to me that his thumb is in the trigger guard. And is the theory that he used his thumb to pull the trigger?
That was basically the theory. But if you look at the caliber of the gun, and by the way, we found video of a real suicide by gunshot as a comparison. That gun should have flown 5, 10, 15 feet away from the recoil. Because obviously, once it was fired, Foster would not have muscle control. His muscles would just immediately go flaccid. And there should have been blood spatter everywhere. Plus, you need to remember, when your brain is destroyed, your heart will go on pumping for as long as it still has blood. And that's why most donor hearts for heart transplants come from traffic accidents where the people's heads have been messed up, like motorcycle accidents. It's why, if you look at drawings of the guillotine executions during the French Revolution, there's always huge piles of straw underneath, because after the head was severed, the heart would just go on pumping. So there should have been just copious amounts of blood all over Foster's body. And the first people there on the scene just said there was a little trickle out of the nose, and that was basically it. And from that, we can deduce that Vince Foster was already dead, and his heart had stopped, and the gun was fired into his mouth to make it look like a suicide.
So the theory was that he placed the gun in his mouth and used his thumb to pull the trigger.
Yes, that was the official story. But here's the interesting part. There are no fingerprints on that gun. It was wiped clean. And I don't think Vince Foster wiped it clean after it was used.
Yeah, that would be unusual as well. Now the gun. You said that it should be very simple to trace these guns. And we're using the recollections of his wife and his daughter, and the silver gun and this gun. How come the guns that we know he owned? Okay, was that one or two guns that we know for a fact?
It was one gun that he had inherited from his father that he'd actually brought up to Washington, D.C., even though there was a gun ban at the time. But it was a sentimental item, and he didn't actually carry it.
Okay, so we know he owned the gun. It belonged to his father, and that gun was never registered anywhere.
I think it was registered down in Arkansas. I mean, there's no question that nickel-plated revolver was the property of Vince Foster.
Right, that one. But that's
that one.
But that's not the one that turns up in the official report. Because we have a photo of a different gun. Obviously, it's a black steel gun, blue steel gun. But now in the report, there's no. They mentioned the black gun or the silver gun.
No, they talk about the black gun because that's the one the public was shown.
Right. That
gun's serial number traced back to a stolen weapon, so the trail dead-ended at that point.
Okay, yeah, okay. So they did trace the gun in the picture to a stolen weapon.
Yes.
Okay, who was it stolen from, do you know?
That was never revealed.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so they did trace the gun. Okay, now, and there was no fingerprints on the gun, you said, right?
That's right.
But there was something about how they removed the stocks off the gun and they found some fingerprints under the stocks of the gun?
They found one fingerprint underneath one of the grips, but it was not Vince Foster's. They tried to link the gun to Vince Foster, saying that the DNA obtained from the gun was not inconsistent with Vince Foster. But if you read the actual report very carefully, the DNA is actually Hispanic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, what is this business about this oven mitt, that there was an oven mitt in the car?
Well, that was sort of come up with to explain why there were no fingerprints on the gun. The original explanation was it was this hot, hot day and the fingerprints just evaporated. But of course, anybody who understands fingerprints knows that they don't just evaporate. They don't just vanish without a trace just because it's warm. And if you go with the official story and Foster's at the point of killing himself, he's going to be sweating profusely. There should have been fingerprints all over that. But it wasn't. So they came up with this idea that for some reason he took the gun to the park, in this oven mitt, except the oven mitt was found in the car, and Foster had walked quite a distance into Fort Marcy Park, supposedly carrying this gun in his hand. But again, there were no fingerprints on it.
Now, what I always find curious, okay, they find an oven mitt in his car, which is unusual.
Yes.
Do we know the match to that oven mitt? Where's the other oven mitt?
Oh, there's absolutely no provenance from where the mitt came from.
Yeah, see? That's no good. You know what I mean? I don't like that. Because you don't just buy one oven mitt. You know what I mean? No, I think they come in a pair when you buy them.
Some do, some don't.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, down at Bed Bath & Beyond, there's a whole rack, and you can buy one if you just need one, or you can buy two.
Do we know if this is a newly purchased oven mitt, or was it used?
No, it just, all they said was oven mitt, and that's it.
Gotcha. But there was a photograph of it.
There was a photograph, but you can't really tell from the photograph. It's just your generic, oven mitt that you could buy in any store anywhere. So there's absolutely no way to trace where it came from. There are tens of thousands just like it in kitchens across America.
Gotcha. Okay, so they find the body. Now, who handles the crime scene investigation?
Well, that's where things kind of get interesting, because Foster was found in Fort Marcy Park, which technically made it the jurisdiction of the park police. And they had the investigation for a while, because remember, the FBI was still going through this management change. Louis Freeh had been sworn in on that very day. So it was a few days before the FBI came on over and said, we're going to exert jurisdiction here, because in theory, once Foster crossed out of the District of Columbia, he'd crossed a border, and that put it in the jurisdiction of the FBI.
Really?
Yeah.
So the FBI did take this case?
Yes. Well, that's why the FBI was interviewing Lisa Foster with the silver-colored gun.
Right. And they justify it by saying that he crossed state lines to
Actually, that's legit. The FBI gets jurisdiction if a crime occurs across some state border, and technically the border of the District of Columbia qualifies as a state border.
Okay, you're right. That would be legit. Okay. All right, so then when do things in this investigation start? Like when do people start seeing that things are fishy?
Well, I honestly don't know, because until I saw that picture on my studio at home, I wasn't paying attention. I mean, I'd heard about the story. Lawyer found dead in Fort Marcy Park. Great. Another lawyer gone. We need more of the same.
Right.
And like most other Americans, I just really wasn't paying attention until I saw that photo. And then all of a sudden, I knew I was looking. There was a fraud. And once your eyes are open and you start looking, the scale of the fraud quickly becomes apparent, whether it's the FD-302 of the Lisa Foster interview, the whited out medical reports, the fun and games with the photographs, the crime scene, the threats against Patrick Knowlton. And then when you look at what was going on in Vince Foster's office at the White House, where the office was looted by Hillary Clinton and some of the other staffers, and all the papers taken out before the office was sealed. Now, theoretically, when you have somebody, a high-ranking government official, who's found dead under questionable circumstances, his office is supposed to be sealed immediately for law enforcement. But Hillary and the staff went into the office. They actually got a technical team checked in through the Secret Service at the White House to open Vince Foster's personal office safe, and the documents were taken. And here's the payoff. 3 days later, the trust declarations for the Clinton Presidential Blind Trust were finally delivered to the trustee. And nobody really knows who actually completed them and who may have forged Vince Foster's signature on them.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, so how do we know that the signature is forged?
Well, Vince Foster was refusing to submit the trust declarations.
Right.
Okay, so for the declarations to go in there, they have to have a signature. And apparently they tried to forge his signature on the ginned-up suicide note, but they botched it so badly, they had to tear the note up in this very bizarre kind of a way, and the part with the signature was just not there when the note was found. And again, just looking at the way that note was torn so that they could justify removing where the signature was, it was a bit of a botch up.
Oh, my God. Okay. Who and they must have interviewed Foster's wife. We know they interviewed his wife about the gun. But
yes.
His friends, his family, and stuff like that, are any of them coming out and saying, hey, this whole thing is fishy?
Oh, they were saying that right from the very, very beginning, and we had Doug Buford was a friend and attorney back in Little Rock saying something was badly askew. Foster's brother-in-law, who'd been a former congressman, did not accept that he was depressed or he committed suicide. Even Webster Hubbell, who was the former Clinton deputy attorney general, was quoted as saying, "Don't believe a word you hear. It was not suicide. It couldn't have been." And we had people like Vincent Scalise, who was a former New York City detective, Fred Santucci, a former forensic photographer for New York City, Richard Saferstein, former head of the New Jersey State Crime Lab, formed their own team and did an investigation of the Vince Foster case for the Western Journalism Center. And the conclusions they came to were homicide cannot and should not be ruled out. The position of the arms and legs of the body were inconsistent with the suicide. And neither of Foster's hands were on the hand grip when it was fired. That's also inconsistent with suicide. And these investigators noted in 50 years of combined experience, they had never seen a weapon or gun positioned in a suicide's hand in such an orderly fashion. And there were other inconsistencies. There were all these multicolored carpet fibers all over his clothes, and they didn't match the carpeting in his car. And certainly there's not a lot of carpeting in Fort Marcy Park. It suggests that his body was being transported, rolled up in a multicolored carpet during the journey from the White House to Fort Marcy Park.
But earlier I said that it seemed like it wasn't premeditated. So now, do you think that also, too, that the dropping of the body over there in the park was premeditated as well, that portion?
I think, yeah. I mean, if you're going to murder somebody that's on the White House staff, you don't want to leave the body in the White House to be found. That's going to be very embarrassing. You need to understand, if you go back and you look at the history of not only the Clintons through that dead body list, but even the government as a whole, they have had decades of being able to get away with things like the Kennedy assassinations because the public used to be very gullible. They would trust what they were hearing on the corporate media. They didn't need to be all that careful. They didn't need to create a fake reality that could survive close analytical examination. And they've developed some very lazy talents. But today, in the age of the internet and the independent media, going back and looking at any of these things, Robert Kennedy's assassination, John F. Kennedy's assassination, the attempted assassination of George Wallace, the Martin Luther King assassination, you begin to realize these were all, just sort of thrown together, and they could get away with it because the media would just keep cranking out the official story to everybody.
That's true, and even after all these years, the official story on this is that, that's all right-wing conspiracy theorists. It's all, water under the bridge. It's all been investigated thoroughly, and we were cleared of everything.
Yeah, that's basically it. Deny, deny, deny. And I keep hearing people who say we have to have a new investigation into not only Vince Foster, but 9/11 and everything. It's a complete waste of time. The government is never going to admit wrongdoing, or the entire house of cards built of lies over the last half century is going to come crashing down. We can decide for ourselves. We can look at the available public evidence and say the case for suicide is not made.
What do you make of the allegations that Hillary had a long-term affair with Foster?
Well, the Clintons had an open relationship. Bill was seeing others on the side, so was Hillary. That just is part of the pattern. There's been a lot of substantiation that Hillary was having affairs not only with Vince Foster, but even with Webb Hubbell, and that's just their lifestyle choice. I think it's more important, though, when we're looking at the upcoming elections, that we need to look at some of the other scandals in the Clinton history, because they may be more germane to what's going on right now. And I specifically want to talk about the 1996 Chinagate scandal. Now, for those who weren't paying attention, back in 1996, Bill Clinton was running for a second term in the White House, and he authorized the transfer of very sensitive U.S. technology to China over the objections of the Pentagon, the CIA, various other groups. And then all of a sudden, Chinese-American citizens started pouring huge amounts of money into his re-election campaign. And it subsequently came out that these Chinese Americans, who were being used as conduits because they were citizens, which made the donations technically legal, were actually getting the money from China, including Chinese intelligence. And the scandal was called Chinagate. It should have resulted in an impeachment, but even back then, Congress seemed to have lost all of its spine. And I bring this up here because, as you know, there is currently concern over Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State conducting all of her business, classified and otherwise, using a private email server, which was against rules, even against an executive order signed by her husband as president, and the Clinton Charitable Foundation. Now, not too long ago, Larry Klayman, who was the founder of Judicial Watch, filed a RICO case against the Clinton Foundation, and he built a strong case that foreign governments that were making donations to the Clinton Foundation were getting favorable treatment from Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. Unfortunately, the case was assigned to a Clinton-appointed judge who simply threw it out, and now the FBI has swept in and said, we'll investigate this, don't worry, you can count on us, which, when you consider how they handled the Foster investigation, I'm not going to hold my breath. But here's the question that nobody in the corporate media seems to want to talk about, okay? You have our nation's deepest, darkest secrets parked on a private email server with worse security than Ashley Madison, one known open portal. And then you have the Charitable Foundation. And so the question is Hillary replaying the Chinagate gambit from 1996 to get more money for whatever it is that she's doing there? Was she selling U.S. secrets using her email server as the delivery system and the Charitable Foundation to collect and launder the payments? Because the Charitable Foundation can take money directly from foreign governments, and something like 40% of the money that's come into the Charitable Foundation has been coming from foreign governments. And it's amazing nobody will ask this question even to ridicule it and dismiss it. It's like this third rail that's out there. Nobody dares touch it.
Wait, so you're saying that you think it's possible that they left their server unsecured, took a payoff from the Chinese to allow the Chinese to hack in and find the secrets?
Well, China was back in 1996, but at this point, I don't think Hillary's going to be discriminating. Anybody who wants to meet her price would be given a password and an IP address and allowed to help themselves to various goodies that are on there. And it certainly makes sense when you realize how weak her server was, how much outside government control and security and monitoring. And one of the things that most people are not aware of, some of the classified documents that were found on Hillary's email server originated with a private government server that does not directly connect to the internet. It's air-gapped. And so for those documents to be on Hillary's email server, somebody had to go into this secure network with a flash drive, copy off the documents, and walk them over to Hillary's email server for them to be there.
You know, that's a very interesting theory, because I myself cannot understand what they're thinking, because we know for a fact that the Clintons were very security conscious. Even during the Monica Lewinsky stuff, he used to tell Monica Lewinsky that the Israelis are tapping the phones in the White House. And we can't talk on the phone.
They probably were, because Bill Clinton at that time, and by the way, the Israelis probably tapped their phone calls at the Watergate end, which is where Monica Lewinsky was staying when they were doing that whole phone sex thing. But Bill Clinton did order the FBI to stop their hunt for Israel's top agent inside the U.S. government, codenamed Mega. And so, yeah, Israel probably was blackmailing Bill Clinton with his little dalliances and so forth. But you're absolutely right. You have Hillary Clinton was provided with a secure desktop to do her business on, and instead she chose to use all these non-secure systems. She kept claiming that the use of her private server was to keep things simple, so she only had to deal with one device. But we have photos of Hillary with the BlackBerry, with the iPhone, with the iPad. She was loaded up on devices. And anybody who knows these devices knows you can have multiple email accounts coming into a single device. So that story never made any sense. And I think that a lot of people the reason they're trying to make the email scandal go away. There are two categories of secrets in politics. There are the little secrets, like Ted Cruz and his roommate, that whole thing. that you use as fodder during the campaign. Then there are the great secrets that are so bad that were they revealed, the entire government would instantly collapse. The truth behind John F. Kennedy, the truth behind 9/11, the truth about a Secretary of State running a spy ring out of the State Department. And so when you get into a scandal of this magnitude, even Hillary's worst enemies are going to be protecting her, which explains why Bernie Sanders, during that first Democratic debate, got up and said, "I'm sick and tired of hearing about those emails," to much applause.
Yeah, it also explains why no one brings up Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile from Florida, and his connections to just about every presidential candidate. Clinton, Trump, and Jeb Bush. He had connections to all of them.
British royalty.
Oh, yeah.
I think common sense has to tell you, on this little private island with all these underage girls and all this sex going on, the place has got to be wired with microphones and cameras. Of course he was running a blackmail trap. And these morons just walked on in there and let themselves be compromised.
Well, if you read the probable cause affidavit in the Palm Beach mansion down there, they said he had recording equipment there hidden in the mansion. And now Ken Starr pops up in there too. He hired Ken Starr as one of his attorneys. Did you know that?
Well, look what a great job Ken Starr did, protecting the real dark secret of Whitewater, which was, government-sanctioned gun and drug running. And he got everybody distracted with a stained blue dress, and everybody else forgot about the far more serious crimes that were going on.
What do you make of, obviously you've been looking into this a lot, what do you make of the Benghazi situation?
Okay, well, first of all, we now know from declassified U.S. government documents that at the same time the U.S. government was telling all of us that ISIS and al-Qaeda are our mortal enemies in the war on terror, and you've got to be afraid of them because we've made up these professionally produced videos of fake beheadings and everything, we find out the U.S. government was smuggling weapons from Libya through that consulate in Benghazi to ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria, which technically amounts to treason. And I think what happened is either they wanted to have that consulate burned down and erase the paper trail, to erase the evidence of the gun running. There may have even been an attempt to stage a raid on the consulate to take the ambassador hostage and create a crisis that Obama could use, because he was then locked in his re-election battle against Mitt Romney, and Mitt Romney was leading. And so if they'd sent in an action team pretending to be ISIS or al-Qaeda and held the ambassador and the other people hostage, and then Obama comes in a week later. I mean, the media would have dropped Mitt Romney. They would all focus about the Benghazi crisis and how will President Obama resolve it. And instead, the situation got out of control, because if you look at where that consulate was, there's residential areas all over there. And it looks like as soon as the shooting started, the Benghazi people, the Libyan people, said, oh, good, they're going after the Americans, and what was supposed to be a controlled destruction of paperwork and a little bit of theater to help Obama win re-election degenerated into a riot in which the ambassador and the other people got tortured to death, basically. And they've been trying to cover up for it ever since. And now we have, thanks to Judicial Watch yet again, that Hillary Clinton did know it was a terrorist attack. It had nothing to do with that silly little video that they ginned together and put out on YouTube. Hillary told Patricia Smith, the mother of one of the victims of the Benghazi attack, basically the day afterwards, that they knew it was a deliberate terrorist attack. Then they were going public saying, oh, it was all about this video, the innocence of Muslims, and the rest of it. Then when Patricia Smith earlier this year came out and said, Hillary was telling me it was a terrorist attack and had nothing to do with the video, and Hillary calls her a liar on national TV. And now we have official State Department phone transcripts that Hillary was saying exactly the same thing to the Prime Minister of Egypt at the time, that they knew it was a terrorist attack. It was a group affiliated with al-Qaeda, which means it could have been a U.S. proxy front carrying this out. But it's just all of these deceptions inside deceptions inside deceptions. The good news is they haven't been able to keep the true story straight, and it's coming back to bite them.
Yeah, it seems to me that Mitt Romney had some kind of foreknowledge that something was going to happen that night in the Middle East involving an embassy. Because remember, there was that other story about how they went into the Egyptian embassy and they took down the flag and they put up an ISIS flag and that kind of crap. Because he called that hastily called press conference in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, what do you make of that?
I think a lot of people had foreknowledge. I mean, we know that the White House was watching the situation through an overhead Predator drone. And those drones, contrary to what you see in the motion pictures, they're not very fast. They don't swoop through the sky leaving sonic booms. They're designed for endurance. And that means very low power, and they're designed to loiter slowly over a target. So for the Predator drone to have been there when the attack started, it had to have been launched ahead of time, and that's another indicator that this was supposed to be some kind of a false flag situation. The consulate was burned down, and we get into this situation where Ambassador Stevens had been feeling that there was a lot of risk at that consulate and had asked for increased security and was turned down by Hillary Clinton's State Department.
Yeah, he was turned down repeatedly. He was even making deals with other embassies and consulates that were leaving and closing up, and to take their equipment at fire sale prices, and they wouldn't even allow him to do that.
Yeah, they just set him up. And again, I don't think it was intended for the ambassador and the others to be killed. I think the goal was for them to be taken hostage to create a situation that would allow President Obama to act presidential and basically take all the media coverage away from Mitt Romney.
Or don't you think maybe it was like an October surprise type situation where they were doing it to make Obama look weak, and then Romney would come up?
No, I don't, because that consulate was directly under the control of Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton wanted Obama to continue as president, because if Mitt Romney had won that election, Hillary Clinton would be out of a job.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What else you got for us? Now, what about the Clinton body count?
Well, the Clinton body count, as I said before, it's just this collection of very strange deaths that have followed the Clintons through the years, like Mary Mahoney, who had been a White House intern. And you need to understand that there were rumors swirling. Before Monica Lewinsky came out, there were rumors swirling that a White House intern with the initial M was about to go public with presidential sexual dalliances. And Mary Mahoney had been a White House intern. She was murdered at the Starbucks. No money was taken. Some of her co-workers were killed as well. There was another former White House intern with the initial M that also died under suspicious circumstances. They didn't know which intern it was going to be, but all of the former White House interns with the initial M suddenly started to drop dead. That's one aspect of it. But again, the Clintons' history goes way beyond just the dead bodies list, way beyond Benghazi, way beyond Chinagate. It's just been this incredible career of corruption, and they keep managing to find a way to beg, bribe, or blackmail their way out of the consequences. You had the cattle futures trade scandal, the travel office firings, Hillary Care. A lot of people have forgotten that Hillary was trying to promote a system similar to Obamacare under President Bill Clinton, which is kind of weird when you realize that there is actually no legal office of the First Lady. It's an honorary title only, and it doesn't convey on Hillary, the First Lady, any legal authority to do anything at all. Chinagate, I mean, it just goes on and on. I wrote an article about that called The Epic of Clinton's Mess, and that's making the rounds on social media as well.
Now, you're saying that you've received threats and harassment and stuff like that. Can you describe some of that?
Well, I generally don't like to go into it. And, back in Southern California, it was basically phone calls in the middle of the night threatening to remove delicate portions of my anatomy. And my response was always, look, if you're going to call me with a death threat, you do it during normal business hours, because I'm trying to get some sleep here. That's kind of tapered off. They finally realized it's not deterring me. In fact, if anything, it angers me and motivates me to push even harder to try and get back to a true republic of the United States of America and away from this very obvious oligarchy we are now living in.
Yeah. So now who are you supporting in the next election? Anybody?
Well, my general attitude is anybody but Hillary. I would be okay with Bernie Sanders winning. I'm in favor of Trump, not because I agree with everything he says, but he's going to shake up a system that is badly in need of shaking up. And one good thing about this election so far. The American people are finally having to confront the fact that American elections are a totally corrupted and bogus system. And people across America are getting furious that the same government that is demanding we pay all these taxes is not actually elected by us. They just choose themselves and take turns at it. And when you couple that with the revelation of the Panama Papers, there is a global system by all the leaders. They vote themselves tax havens to use so they don't have to pay taxes. At the same time, they need more money from you because the debt to the banks is out of control. It is a totally messed up system. It is dominated by self-interest, money junkie greed, and power fanatics. And they have lost touch with the fact that the government's actual job is supposed to be to provide for the nation what the nation needs but cannot organize for itself. And I really do foresee the U.S. government about to collapse the way the former Soviet Union did, because the American people don't believe the government anymore. They don't trust them anymore. It's zero confidence, and that's exactly what was happening in the Soviet Union leading up to their collapse as well. I'm seeing huge number of parallels going on.
Yeah, that's true. The lack of confidence is just, it's thick. It's thick in the air, you know. But with Trump, though, Trump has a long-time friendship with the Clintons and even the Bushes, and even talked to Bill about running for president right before he did. You can overlook that?
I can overlook that because, you know, the thing, 6 degrees of separation. When you're at that strata of our society with that kind of money and power, everybody meets everybody. Everybody's friends with everybody because those friendships open up other opportunities for commerce and business, or on the darker side, opportunities for more corruption.
Yeah, but obviously Bernie never went to play golf down at Mar-a-Lago, you know what I mean?
No, he didn't, and that's another reason I like Bernie. He's a fellow New Englander, and he reminds me an awful lot of my family that I grew up in, and I'd like to see him humiliate Hillary Clinton. I basically went into this election season with the idea I don't want either Bush or Clinton in that November election. Jeb Bush is gone. And, you know, we're hearing these rumblings about a contested GOP convention. I don't think they'd be foolish enough to try and put Jeb Bush back in by imperial edict. The rank-and-file Republicans are just furious at what's going on. So are the Democrats. They're looking at how Bernie Sanders is winning election primary after primary after caucus against Hillary, and yet Hillary still has most of the delegates. We're looking at what the GOP just did in Colorado and Wyoming, and they're going to do it in Indiana, where they didn't even have an election. They just said, voters, stay home. We will choose the leaders for you, and if you are a loyal party member, you will support the leader, the candidate that we choose. And people are understanding that's not what the United States of America is like. If you want to talk about party politics, then you talk about nations like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, where the party controlled the rise to leadership and not the ordinary people. They were allowed to go through the ballot booths to make it look like they still had some control, but it was completely an illusion. And we've got exactly that same situation here in the United States now.
Okay, thank you, Michael Rivero. I'm going to beg you to come back.
Okay. Anytime.
I'm going to beg. The website is whatreallyhappened.com, and the radio show is going to be back on Republic Broadcasting Network. What time is it again?
It's 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Central U.S. time. It's currently on the Genesis Communication Network. You can go to GCN Live, or there's a player and a link to the streams at my website. As of the first Monday of next month, we'll be at the Republic Broadcasting Network.
Michael Rivera, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.